Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. Continuing with this tradition of gathering together on the lunar quarters. So by the Thai calendar, lunar calendar, I don't know what the British one says, but by the Thai calendar in our tradition, this is the new moon, or no moon. It's the nights when there's no moon showing. And the tradition in many communities, many Buddhist countries, my understanding, is that on these nights, oftentimes the tradition will be to chant a particular sutta, teaching of the Buddha. Sometimes people just do on the full moon, sometimes every moon, the Dhamma Sutta, or the setting in motion, the wheel of Dhamma. And historically it's considered the first teaching that the Buddha offered after his full awakening. At least that's what's handed down to us. And our COVID protocols as such, we aren't doing much chanting together with day visitors just yet. And so we met in the house this evening at 7 p.m., the resident community. We've been meeting during a lot of the last few months and chanting at 7 p.m. And so this evening, Ajahn Kachana led us in the chanting of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta in the Pali scriptural language. And I can't imagine how many Dhamma reflections have been offered around the theme of this teaching. And how many more will be offered. But I think it's a greatly shared opinion that this teaching of the Buddha is really crucial. It really has the crux of the teachings, the crux of the roadmap out of suffering. It's not particularly complicated. In fact, I don't think it's complicated at all. But realizing spiritual awakening is not about the intellect. It's not an intellectual exercise or an intellectual achievement. It's not about figuring something out that's complicated with the intellect. But it's about that letting go, that realizing, and the release. It's releasing our grip on things that bind us, whatever that is. One of our elders refers to this teaching as the perfect teaching. Perfect. And I've heard many people say that if they only had one teaching if that's all they had, that would be the one. Now those are opinions, and so it's all debatable because somebody else can say something else, and that's normal. But I find it interesting. So in this teaching, it's laying out the Four Noble Truths. This was apparently the first time that the Buddha spoke about this to his fellow samanas, fellow religious seekers that he had lived with before, and he went and sought them out after the Buddha realized his own full awakening on his own, of practicing on his own, and he did seek out people to share this with, share the realization, and offered this teaching. I think it was only last week that I was reflecting during one of these talks about Nirodha, which is the third noble truth, and and so I'm not going to focus on that this week, but that was focusing on the what's often referred to as cessation, or cessation of dukkha, of suffering, the cessation of grasping, that release, that no longer making a problem out of our experiences in life. But the first noble truth is, as probably everybody is aware, dukkha, there is dukkha, and dukkha has many translations. And I find it very useful to actually consider a few of them simultaneously, or as simultaneously as possible. Yes, referred to as suffering, could be stress, dissatisfaction, unsatisfactoriness, pain. That's the basket of terms I tend to use myself. And it's everything from the most obvious dukkha, right in your face, unavoidably noticeable, to the most subtle. So there is this spectrum of dukkha. It's not just like a light switch where it's just on and off. It's got a dimmer. And it's from the most subtle to the brightest. And that simple statement in the sutta, that there is dukkha, that recognition. And I know in my first encounters with teachings, actual Dhamma teachings, and I say that because my first encounter with the tradition was more just about learning to meditate. There wasn't a reflective side to it. It was really more a technical side of the technique of meditation. And then when I was thankfully exposed to reflective teachings, which I have to say, in my own perception, is the bulk of the Buddhist teachings are reflective teachings. There's very few teachings where he talks about technique. And then hearing, this teaching on dukkha, or if you hear the phrase, all things are unsatisfactory, and as dukkha, suffering, especially suffering, I was like, internally, I'm not suffering. This was about 30 years ago, and I think it was at the time that, just around the time that former Yugoslavia was just exploding, just shattering apart. And I was living in central London, and a lot of refugees were during those years. Soon after that, were just flooding into that area where I lived, because there was a lot of accommodation, thankfully, available for people. And I thought, well, that's suffering, reading in the news and seeing on the TV. And then over time, hearing more people reflecting on it, but really that leading me to reflect on dukkha. It's not what other people say about dukkha that's important, it's what we realize. Do we actually take that on the gut level? On the gut level, are we understanding dukkha? Do we really understand that, there is this, which is referred to as dukkha. There is dissatisfaction. We see it for ourselves. We feel it. We feel the unsatisfactoriness of a situation, or the pain of a situation. Or, that full-blown suffering. The real full other end of the spectrum. And if we don't accept that it exists in ourselves, if it's only something outside of us, and not say, oh, here it is present, then how, if we don't accept that, then how will we transcend suffering or dukkha? How will we let go of the causes of our experience? So this beautiful teaching, this quote-unquote perfect teaching, the second noble truth is that, yes, there is a cause. So it's a very simple equation, which has been compared to the way medicine was often, like medical doctors would view a patient. So, okay, there's a sickness, there's a cause of the sickness, there is an end to the sickness, and there's a cure. So the cause of dukkha is referred to in English as craving. Craving is probably the word most commonly used for this Pali scriptural word, tanha. And interestingly, at least I find interesting that the word tanha also can be used for the word thirst. Thirst, like real abject thirst or craving. You're thirsty. And maybe not even abject, just that I'm thirsty, you need water. Now, obviously comparing to something like being thirsty, we need to drink to stay alive, so it's not the best comparison. But it is an interesting correlation. So this craving, and within the sutta, this is my favorite, my personal favorite a line in the chanting is in this section. And the Pali Yayang Tanha Pono Bhavika Nandira Gasahagata Tatra Tatra Binandide Sayatidang Kama Tanha Bhava Tanha Vibhava Tanha. And so in the English it's, I'll see if I can get this right, the craving which leads to rebirth and is bound up in pleasure and lust, ever seeking fresh delight, now here, now there, namely craving for sense pleasure, craving to become something, to acquire and become, and craving to annihilate or to get rid of or push away. And I find that just that, and using that paragraph, right, the craving which leads to rebirth. Now that opens up a whole big can of worms. So what is rebirth? So does that mean rebirth as in what people often refer to as reincarnation? Is it born into another living being? Whether that's human or other than that? Or does it mean rebirth into a sense of identity? Or rebirth into a mind state, heart state, emotional state? Or does it mean both? Or neither? And for myself, the way I find most useful is I don't tend to focus on the physical rebirth. I do happen personally to believe that and I don't know, but I believe that this isn't the only life. It just seems to make sense to me, having pondered this for 30 years, that this life force, if it is seeking rebirth somewhere, why wouldn't it be able to do that? But I don't find it all that useful to ponder anymore. But I find the thinking of it in terms of sense of identity or mind or emotional state, a sense of being, a sense of becoming, I find that very useful. And my sense is that if there is something as such as physical rebirth, is that if you deal with the one in this life, of not trying to become something, not trying to be, not trying to form a sense of self, a sense of identity, if you are able to let go of that, then that'll take care of the physical one, because it's gone cool. So things have cooled down. There's no longer that craving for rebirth. So that one takes care of the other. That's the way I think about it, at least. So craving. So the craving that leads to rebirth, so which is bound up in pleasure and lust, ever seeking fresh delight, now here, now there, namely sense pleasure, craving to become, craving to push away, get rid of, to annihilate. So fresh delight. So it's bound up in pleasure and lust, so it's that craving, it's constantly seeking. Or maybe even not constantly, but when we're in that seeking mode, that seeking mode of trying to get some sort of hit, some sort of pleasurable hit. And they can be, here again, it's everything from the most obvious to the most subtle. And this is where meditation is the great support, is that the more we can allow the mind and heart to settle, then seeing more and more subtle forms of dukkha, forms of craving, forms of ever seeking fresh delight. So the meditation isn't just to blank out, it's not for blanking out, it's not for zoning out, it's for being able to see clearly what's going on internally. Because when you see, then we have the opportunity to let go. We have the opportunity to not follow that energy of seeking, looking outwards. And it's amazing as human beings is that we can, it's almost, I would say, it's probably probably safe to say in any situation we find ourselves, we can also find ourselves in this dynamic if we're not attentive to it. In a monastery, because you think, well, there's not a lot to distract yourself with in the monastery. Oh, you can find something. you can figure something out. Some sort of way of getting sort of a pleasurable hit. It won't be the most obvious things, because it is. It's just way simpler living in communities like this. But we can find ourselves absorbing into something which is even wholesome. We can absorb into wholesome things, but if it's what we're doing it for is the key. Are we doing it as a distraction to get pleasure, to get some form of delight, some sort of sense of being? We can pick up a project, create, make some sort of, get all absorbed into something in the workshop, or who knows, you can even sewing lots of robes, or there's all sorts of ways here. So we don't have television and movies, and we can't just go and reach in the refrigerator and take things, and so our options are narrowed. And so the types of delight that the Buddha mentioned, that I've already mentioned a couple of times, this craving for sense pleasure is the first of the three categories. And so that's looking at this through the lens of the six senses, six sense bases. So because in Buddhist practice, we, instead of the five traditional senses that are often spoken about in other traditions, so we have the sense base of the eye. So craving for delight through the eye. So we want to surround ourselves. We need to make ourselves happy, support our well-being by going to see something beautiful, surrounding ourselves with beautiful things, making sure that we maybe only see beautiful things. Now, nothing essentially wrong with that. I mean, just look around this hall. Great effort was put into creating a hall, an environment which was pleasing to the eye. So it's not about it's not saying that we should not have things that are pleasing to the eye around us, but it's that craving, that ever-seeking fresh delight, kind of never quite getting enough, or having to have. So do I have to sit in this hall to be having a sense of well-being? Or if somebody comes in and puts something on the shrine, so maybe they use some vases that I don't like. And by the way, I like these vases, just in case somebody thinks I'm criticizing. But it's if somebody puts something on the shrine that I don't like, so does that affect my overall well-being, or can I just say, oh, that's not my cup of tea, not something I like, or somebody rearranges the hall in a way that I don't find pleases me, so am I suffering over that? Or can I put in effort to make an environment pleasing and have it, that's good enough. So these are just some examples. So do I have to live in a hut, in a kuti, in the forest that has a beautiful view? So that would be my craving for sense pleasure through the eye. Do I need to have all my belongings be pleasing, visually pleasing to me? And in the world, there's so many options, There's enough options here in the monastery, but so then you would take another sense base, so through the eye, through the ear. So do I only have to hear pleasing things, or am I craving, seeking that out? Do I need to listen to music to be well, to be happy? If I'm bored, do I then go and try and find some music? So in our tradition, we're very much steering away from listening to music, and nothing wrong with music as such, but it is very very stirring, and if it can actually, I know for myself, it can leave a very big echo in my consciousness, hearing music, and especially music with words. And so we tend to steer away from that, very much so. But if in wherever I'm living, if I need to listen to music to get rid of boredom, I know plenty of people that they, in their house where they live, they always have something on the radio, always something playing, either or the TV or the radio or the stereo, or sometimes more than one at once. Sometimes two things going at once, because they don't feel comfortable with silence. I've been told that directly. Oh no, I can't stand the silence. Because they start thinking, they hear their mind too much, or it makes them nervous. And that's not to be criticized, because I think that's the case for a lot of us humans. So through the ear, through eye, ear, through the nose. So do we always, how do we react when, maybe there's an odor that is displeasing? So do we have to quickly cover that up, or only surround ourselves with pleasing things to be smelling? Nothing wrong with that, but if that's the way we're propping up our happiness, our overall well-being, then it's that ever-seeking fresh delight. It's that momentum, that wheel of desire, that wheel of craving through the tongue. So in other words, what we taste, what we eat and drink. This is another sense base, is that do we always just have to have the food we like, and seeking good, tasty food, and or is it good enough? Are we living to eat, or are we eating to live? And I find, especially this tradition of monastic life, very helpful around addressing that. I wasn't much of a foodie. I wasn't that interested in food in my life before coming into the monastic life. But I enjoyed good food. But I wasn't, oftentimes I'd eat pretty much maybe two different things during the week. It was almost the same thing every night. Sort of, and it was, made it as good as possible. But I wasn't particularly interested, so it wasn't really a big issue for me coming to the monastery. In terms of not having control over what I eat, what we eat, because we live on alms food, and so we're not allowed to cook or shop. We're not allowed to ask and direct the kitchen what to prepare. So every day when we go up to the kitchen to receive our food, it's a surprise, and you can either take it or not. You can take from this dish or that dish, and that's where your choice is. So yeah, are we propping up our sense of well-being through that sense base? The next sense base is referred to as body. So what we feel through the body, so tactile sensation. So maybe what we feel when we're sleeping. So is our bed comfortable enough? Is our clothing comfortable? Is it a type of cloth that we find, oh, I can't wear that, it's too rough on my skin, or it's not pure cotton, or no, I only wear Egyptian cotton, or I can only sleep. I need certain types of sheets that touch my skin. I mean, I can find so many examples through the body. Or I have to have the temperature only a certain way, otherwise I can't be at ease. And so we can find our own examples of that craving. Do I need to take a long shower? Do I leave the water running, as hot as I want, as long as I want, or can I actually turn it off while during part of my shower when I don't need the water running, and just have it on long enough to get wet and to rinse off, so that we're saving resources, these precious resources? Or do I need to indulge in this sense pleasure? So those are just a few examples. And then the last one, the sixth sense, is mind. So I tend to refer to it myself as the intellect. So that intellectual stimulation. Read something, talk about something, ponder something, intellectualizing. And there's nothing wrong. I mean, I feel it's a great benefit, to have the intellect that we have, to a certain degree, a benefit, because we can do things like this. We can be pondering spiritual teachings. We can discuss wholesome things with people. So we can use the intellect in really marvelous ways. We can create, we can create helpful things that help society, not just helping ourselves, but helping society, helping the world. And so, like all of the six senses, is that it's not that there's anything wrong with having that sense base, but it's more how it's related to. How are we relating to the stimuli that comes in through that sense base? So that with the intellect, there's this lovely word in the Pali scriptural language, papancha, and it's often translated as mental proliferation. So it's that the mind, picking up a topic and proliferating. You get absorbed in something. Sometimes you'll start out someplace and then you just end up. I find it quite fascinating sometimes where my mind ends up from some stray thought, and then all of a sudden you're miles away. You're someplace completely else, somewhere else. Yeah, or getting overly interested in the intellectualizing things to the degree where it's just not even helpful anymore. It's just sort of mental exercise. It's just like mental exercise, and with that we can certainly form a lot of dukkha. Because then with the intellect, with ideas, with views, with opinions, the clinging to those is really, it's in my own experience of these things, letting go of bodily comfort, letting go of needing to see pleasing sights, hear pleasing sounds, taste pleasing things, have pleasing things touching my body. That I haven't found, or I don't have a huge difficulty addressing those things. I'm not saying that I have let go of them all, But I know in the mind is that when I'm clinging to views, when I'm clinging to my ideas, my opinions, my intellectual, the fruits of my intellectual ponderings, that complication, and then we're bumping up against other people's views and opinions, ideas, trouble. Because for me, the suffering is in the mind. It's not the bodily pain, and that's the suffering. It's the picking it up with the mind, the fighting in the mind, or that fighting energy. And if it's not in the intellect, it's just that movement of just not wanting, that pushing away, that non-acceptance, not accepting the reality of the living in a body, that it is painful at times. Sometimes a lot of the time. So we have these six senses, so that's the first of the three categories that the Buddha listed as when he says, these cravings, and he says, namely, and then he lists the three, and that's the first one, craving for sense pleasure, kamma tanha. And I've already mentioned a little bit about bhava, or often referred to as becoming, that trying to become something, become somebody, to form, to create an identity, a sense of self. That movement towards, being seen as. You want to be somebody. Don't want to be a nobody. So does that mean that we don't try to get a profession or get a craft or a skill? No, it doesn't mean that we don't try. It doesn't mean that we don't follow through with that. It doesn't mean that we don't succeed. But it's the identification with, that movement towards that hit of being perceived as, known as, is one way I like to look at it. So we have the idea that we want to achieve something or get some sort of recognition, and that's going to make us happy. And so then if we cling to that, and then let's say we do quote unquote achieve our goal, then that's the craving that leads to rebirth. You're born into that if you believe that you are such and such. That is truly the fabric of, that's who and what you are. And even if it's not that far gone, it's just that belief in it. Or that, even if you don't believe in it, but you think other people are believing in it, and then it gets threatened. When our identities are threatened, and that's where that fear, and so when we fight that, that's where we feel threatened. That's when we can actually, people will lash out at other people when they feel threatened. Their sense of identity is threatened. People might not be coming at us with a gun or a spear or a knife, or there might not be a wild animal chasing us, but that feeling, that sense of threat to our existence. And we can do this in monastic life if we, really overly identify, oh no, I really am a nun or a monk or an anagarika or a novice. Or let's broaden it out, oh, I really am a Buddhist, and then somebody pushes that button a little bit and says, well, Buddhism's not really that great, it's not really a religion, and maybe threatens us. Yeah, if we believe that a monk or a nun actually has true essence, permanent essence, permanent or core identity, and then if that threatens us, if we're threatened by something, then there's suffering. Even if we're not threatened by something, just that holding on to that, holding on to a sense of self, guarding it, even though maybe you're never threatened. It's like if somebody has a lot of material wealth and lives wherever they're living, if they're living in constant fear of it being taken, being broken into, being attacked or robbed, even if it never happens, it's that constant living in fear. Even if it's a mild, subtle fear, this is dukkha. And not wishing to go on too long tonight, I'll just briefly speak about the third category, vibhavatanha. So bhavatanha is that becoming, acquiring, leaning towards. And then vibhavatanha is the negation. So the V, the negates. So it's as I've used already this evening a couple of times, that sort of annihilation tendency, that pushing away, that non-acceptance, that trying to get rid of. So the bhava, trying to acquire on some level, following the craving and acquiring, and I've been focusing on identity, but it's also trying to get rid of identity, maybe trying to get rid of the things that we don't like about ourselves, to get rid of the people around us that we don't like. That feeling of, that person at work, I can't bear them, I have to get my desk moved, I can't sit near them another day. Or I can't wait until they quit this job, or I can't wait until this person leaves the monastery, or whatever. It can happen in any setting. I can't wait to get rid of my head cold, if we're sick, that pushing, that non-acceptance, that pushing away. Oh, I'll be okay when I get rid of this. It's that type of energy. That opposite of the acquiring. Or when I get this, I'll be okay. No, when I get rid of this, I'll be okay. So we have this push-pull dynamic. And if we're not aware of that, this is just, we could go on just all day, every day. This just constantly trying to get what we want, get rid of what we don't want. So just to wrap up, to this talk, just using this very simple teaching. They're not complicated words, but to reflect, to ponder and to look at our own experiences and to see, well, is this real? Is this teaching, put it to the test. Is there dukkha? And if there's no, and if the answer, once we really look, once we learn how to recognize it, so that's the thing, is that through learning to recognize it, then we will also learn to recognize when it's not there. We will recognize the cessation of dukkha, or the non-presence of dukkha. By learning how to recognize craving, like what sense pleasure really is, like to ponder, oh right, through the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. And to recognize when we are actually experiencing sense pleasure. and learning how to just leave it at that. Oh, I'm wanting something. We are sense-desire beings. We are sense beings, sensual beings. That's how our bodies function. That's how our minds function. So it's as often some people reflect. It's not the wanting that's the problem. It's because that can be the spark. But if we don't give it any fuel whatsoever, what happens to a spark when there's no fuel? It just dies right there. It fades away right there. So the spark of some sort of desire, maybe it's something really wholesome and that we should follow through with it. Oh, I feel like going and helping this person. Follow through with it. Absolutely. But don't form an identity about it. Oh, aren't I wonderful because I'm always wanting to help people? Or oh, I'm only happy when I'm helping people. I could go on and on with examples. So learning to see these things, and this is where, as I said, meditation, quietude, reflection, simplicity, we can really learn to know our own responses to whatever experiences are coming our way. Learn to, really get to know, like, what was Bhava becoming? Just to see, really turn the light inwards and look into our own life and see if that's something that we've ever done. Are we doing that? Are we trying to push things away? Are we trying to create, form an identity? Are we trying to change, other people's identity, push their identity away, their temperaments, their personalities? Am I trying to squash my personality, create some sort of personality that's likable? Oh, I want people to like me. Oh, people don't like this about me. I need to squash this. Now, it doesn't mean we don't, work on our social skills. Of course, live with other people, live with other beings on this planet. But it's here again. It's the non-clinging, the non-grasping at these things. To know clearly what we're doing. And the story I think I told a few months ago. I think I was reflecting on this. And how, when I was my last year in living in lay life, I think the story I told was I went to Thailand with my then partner, and she and we stayed a little bit too late on this beach where you could only really get out at low tide. Apparently there was a path that you could find, but we couldn't find it, so we thought, oh, we could just get around the rocks. The water's in. But it doesn't look too deep. We can get around these rocks and get back to where we were living, the main beach, to where our house was. And then we got into trouble. We got about halfway there, and the water was really getting dangerous, and there were these very sharp rocks. And I intentionally tried to look brave. I intentionally tried to put out and become. But this is the thing. I didn't try to believe. I wasn't believing in it. Is where I realized, and I didn't realize it at the time. But I really tried to be seen as something that I really wasn't. I really wasn't feeling brave. I was feeling absolutely scared out of my wits. But she was panicking. And if she had panicked and if I'd panicked, that was a recipe for disaster. I could really see a real disaster. Death was looming, in my opinion. And I thought, the only thing to do here is stay calm. Look brave, act like you know exactly what you're doing, and try and get out of this. And we did, obviously. And so I didn't understand these teachings at that time clearly enough to see what I'd done. and it wasn't a problem. I didn't, here again, I didn't, and but if we got back to our house and I felt all puffed up like, oh, aren't I marvelous? I just saved our lives, because I have this skill to, because then we can hijack the moment, we can hijack the beauty of our acts, of our wholesome acts as well. But this memory came up years later when I was really spent. Well, a lot of my focus in my practice is around reflecting on this very dynamic, and that example came up, and so that's why I tend to share it. So yeah, once more, I'll try and close out this talk again, just by saying, try and use these very simple teachings, and unpack them, reflect them, use them for the way the Buddha meant them to be used, as reflective tools. Look in our own life, look in our own experience, and we can use past experience. As I've used the example tonight, I use a lot of past experience to look at, oh, that's what I was doing. And then see the result. Because by seeing, then we know what needs to be let go of. If we don't see what we're doing, then this pattern just keeps going on and on and on, uninterrupted. We need to put a circuit breaker in there, and that circuit breaker is mindfulness of what we're doing. So I'll leave it there for your reflection.